Hi, Steve. Tell us a little bit about yourself and also the role that you have, how you end up doing what you're doing.
Hi, Phil. So obviously I'm Steve Penney. At the moment, I'm the head of sixth form at a fairly small voluntary Roman Catholic high school in Lincoln. Um, Previous to that, I've held jobs on several senior leadership teams across the city of Lincoln in comprehensive schools, some with really large sixth forms, up to about 500 students in the sixth form, some much smaller, different contexts in terms of ability, spread, and demographic in terms of social and economic mobility. Uh, and that's kind of brought me around to where I am today. I've held positions on senior leadership teams, specifically about in the past behaviour, community liaison, but I've always had an interest in online learning and digital literacy, not just in the students, but in my colleagues as well. And I've always been interested in how that fits into our education system as a whole, and whether or not those things can be beneficial in the settings that I'm present. So at the moment we have a small sixth form. It is roughly roughly 70 to 80 students of a population of about 800. So it's a small school with a small sixth form. Uh, and I've always said that being head of sixth form is without doubt the best job in any school. That's that's where I'm at. So I'm at the moment I'm really enjoying my time as a teacher.
Mm.
It's come around quite nicely, actually.
So why is it, the best job you can have as a head of sixth form? What is it about the job that you like so much, and why do you get up every morning going to work, to want to do what you do?
Well, there's a number of reasons really. Some of them are academic, some of them uh, more personal, um, some of them, if you like, cultural as well. Really, I enjoy the freedom. Uh, I enjoy the freedom I'm given and the trust that I'm given. The head of sixth form can potentially be involved in pastoral work, um, curriculum planning, teaching and learning, definitely, and safeguarding. So, in a sense, the running a sixth form is almost like running a little school within a school.
Mm.
And I'll caveat there with almost, because sixth formers that try and stand alone from the rest of their surroundings will never work. So it has to be part and parcel of that. Well, I mean, at the moment we have a very clear 7 to 13 ethos, so we expect to pull through as many students into the sixth form as we possibly can, despite our fairly challenging demographic from time to time. Um, and I guess I might be quite controversial, but I find the sixth form is more interesting. they, they they say more interesting things, and as a sociologist, sociology teacher, history teacher, the conversations you can have are sometimes more deeper, more meaningful. And I also think that sending them off to university is a real watershed in lots of people's lives and families' lives as well. So it might sound a bit twee, but I feel that sometimes I do actually make a difference. That I firmly believe that education can be transformational, and I get to do that.
Mm.
Um, Particularly year 12, because year 12 is a year when we take out the terminal exams, and once we remove the AS exams, it allowed year 12 to be a year where you can be much more creative, and it can be a year of discovery. for these students, where you can take some of the structures down that have been in place previously and allow them some more freedom to think and to learn as well in lots of different ways. So without a shadow of a doubt, for me, that freedom of expression is something that attracts me the most about being head of sixth form.
Okay, cool. So earlier you've already mentioned, online learning, which is actually the topic that we want to focus on today. So I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about your experience so far when it comes to facilitating or delivering any online learning.
Well, I think one of the first, I guess, the starting point really for me would be to make sure that we are talking about learning and we're not talking about teaching, because they fundamentally aren't the same thing. Now, in a traditional classroom, teaching and learning are very much interwoven with each other. The dynamic and the interaction that you have with students. Online, it is fundamentally different. So what I've focused on is focus on learning, not teaching. So that in itself means that you focus on facilitation and access and opportunity. That doesn't mean that you don't think carefully about those resources that you may provide and how they fit into the course you're trying to deliver, or into securing the right kind of outcomes for students. But I've moved away from trying to replicate or trying to teach in the same way that I may teach in a traditional classroom environment.
Why is that? Because I find that quite interesting, because I suppose, like, for many people who are very experienced practitioners in a classroom, you kind of know what works for you. Like, you can go into a classroom every year at the start of the academic year thinking, like, I know exactly what I need to do to make this a good learning environment for my students. And so for those people who are wondering, it's like, well, can I not replicate that in an online learning environment? What would you say to that?
Well, I think it's extraordinarily difficult to maintain those personal interactions that we have in the classroom. I mean, when I teach, I move around a great deal. I teach from the back, teach from the middle, teach from the front. I read the room all the time, and that's really important, because because if you're reading the room, you can direct your attention to where it needs to be. You can stop. You have a feel from your audience about whether or not the lesson is going in the direction you want it to, whether or not they, in a sense, that whether they're getting it, to put it in other ways, whether you have to stop, whether you need to go back and revisit a misconception, whether you are in fact maintaining their attention, whether they're switched off, whether they are whether they're happy to ask a question, and if not, whether you can invite a question, and and of course they can't, in many ways, avoid that interaction. There's nowhere for them to, I wouldn't say hide, because that sounds like that you're in pursuit of them, but there's nowhere for them to space for them to disengage from the learning environment and the learning experience. Now, online, that is very different, because there are lots of ways that you can disengage from the experience if you so wish. You can't have that subtle one-to-one conversation with people to either encourage them or praise them or discourage them from doing something that is not conducive to learning. So I think the idea that you can reconstruct or recreate that dynamic with a group of people online is a myth, in my opinion. I don't think you can. You might be able to do it on a one-to-one or a one-to-two, maybe a really small group with people that you already know quite well. And I think that you can have a little bit of a dynamic there, just as we are now. We have met a few times in the past, so we've got a little bit of a context and a little bit of a dynamic, and that might work. But certainly when you've got a larger audience, and definitely if the audience is below, if it's like say year 10 and 11, you can't replicate that. It's difficult enough to try and replicate that with sixth form students, in my experience. So they are fundamentally different.
Can I just clarify that for a moment? So, like when you're talking about it's harder to engage students, are you including both synchronous online learning as well as asynchronous online learning? So, obviously, I can very easily imagine how it's much more difficult to create the experience that you would have in a classroom when it comes to an asynchronous platform that students engaging with materials themselves, like independently. But I also want to kind of just make sure that I'm understanding you correctly in the sense that even when it comes to synchronous teaching or learning activities, like using Teams, for example, you do feel like it's much harder to engage students, even when you can see them, I suppose, like on camera live.
No, I think that the synchronous is the most problematic of the two.
Okay.
I mean, using Teams, you can track activity and you can track access to resources. And then when you blend it and see them face to face later, then you can pick up on how their experience was with those resources. And also, there's a cultural dynamic here we need to think about. Lots of us, in my experience, lots of students make a quite clear definition between school and social life. Sometimes when you're trying to do the synchronous things online with the students, for some reason, they don't make the connection between the software, what they're doing, and the expectation that they need to learn something. And I think that's a cultural thing, because I'm on camera, for some reason I'm not a teacher anymore. It's really quite a strange experience. Or if they're not in the classroom, they're not a student anymore. And I think certainly the younger they are, the more difficult they get to understand that. And I think it also, and the other part about that is they also need to have an understanding of how they learn themselves and how they will need to behave in that environment to learn. And I think it's too much of a leap. It's too much of a gap. So the synchronous things are the most problematic by far, I think. And I think again we need to consider whether we can, but actually should we, and is it really delivering the outcomes that we wanted to deliver? I in many cases I don't think it does. I think and that's why I've not focused on trying to recreate a teaching environment. I've tried to recreate, if you like, create a learning kind of ecosystem where they can engage in lots of different types of learning if they wish, and types of materials.
Okay, well, actually, that ties in with what I was going to ask you as well, in terms of, because the fact that you're saying it's quite challenging in many different aspects of online learning, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, then my question would be, why do we bother if that's the case? Like, if we are, for example, confident practitioners in a classroom, we know what we do can work, you know, pretty much consistently, then, you know, why would we bother to try something like online learning when it's going to probably create some issues, or at least, at the very least, make things like more difficult, if you like. So why do we do it?
Well, I think we need to blend it. I think that in some respects, I suppose that the idea of an independent learner is a bit of a red herring. None of us are, in my experience, are truly independent. We all we all are part of a system of learning, and we rely on other people to learn and to find other and find ways to learn and resources to learn. So the only independence there is how and when you access that.
Mm,
You're never truly independent. I know I'm not truly independent. I'm independent in the sense that I can go and find things and use things to add to my knowledge, but I'm not a truly independent thinker
mm,
in many respects, and it's unreasonable to expect sixth formers to behave that way either. I think if you blend it, it can certainly add to the learning experience. It can deepen, it can widen,
mm-hmm,
if you like, broaden. It can add some freedom and some responsibility that in year 12 in particular they need, and they, in fact, a lot of them are hungry for a different way. Remember that they've been through a very structured educational system up to the sixth form, and some of them don't want more of the same. They want to grow as a person as well, and take that responsibility for their own learning. So we need to trust them to do that,
mm,
but we need also to make sure that the clues that we leave, if you like, the crumbs that we lead them in the right direction to find the answers that we want them to find.
mm,
It's not a free for all. So the materials that I direct them to or that I create are specifically designed to enhance, deepen, broaden the experience they've had in the classroom.
mm,
So I may ask them to look at those things before we have a face to face.
mm-hmm,
I may ask them to access it while we're having a face to face, and I may ask them to access it after we've had a face to face. But in
mm,
in a sense, the face to face is the thing that pulls all your things together,
mm,
and it also allows them to to discover to discover how they learn themselves.
mm,
Because I don't actually think that our education system has room for learners to reflect on how they learn. I think if we think that they do, then I think we're kind of kidding ourselves a little bit, particularly considering how large the amounts of content is that we have to get through in
mm,
GCSE courses, for example. Um, so that's why I bother,
mm.
because it adds a whole new dimension to the way they learn, and it actually makes post-16 education more attractive to them as well.
In what way?
Well, they feel trusted, they feel empowered, right, to go away and find and to follow the crumbs and to find and to follow the clues that you leave for them, and go further and find other things. They feel that they have the potential to express themselves better,
Mm.
right?
So,
Go on, sorry.
so I was going to say, like, in terms of that kind of like more independent learning that you're saying that the online provision can give them, do you see it this being something that you can actually do without it being online, or is online learning itself offering you something that, without technology or, the internet, you wouldn't be able to have?
No, I think the technology facilitates the depth, breadth, and scale that you can offer them. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, previous to that, it would have been very difficult. Or what you would have done was take them a load of copied articles and books, and it's just more of the same.
Mm.
Online, they can have visual stimulus. They can listen to podcasts. They can listen to interviews. They can watch TED videos. They can find lots of different ways to explore the subjects that you're asking them to explore. I mean, today, for example, I was teaching a Year 12 criminology class,
Mm.
and we were investigating hate crime. So I've encouraged most of them to bring their own device into school. So they've got their own device. They've got my PowerPoint up. At the same time, I'm talking to them. I'm introducing the class, and reminding them of the general direction of travel. This is why we're doing this. This is where we're going. And then we discussed what hate crime was. I was happy that they got the crucial parts of that down, and then we used the online provision to go and find some examples
Mm.
that supported and broadened and deepened their understanding of what hate crime actually looks like. So they then went off and discovered in their own time, using the link I provided them,
Mm-hmm.
with lots of potential things to look at. And actually, that was simply from a BBC link
Mm.
that had all the different hate crimes that have been reported in the last 6 months. So what they got then was the basics about what hate crime is, and then they got a much broader and deeper understanding of hate crime by all the examples that they chose that they were interested in, from what they could gather from the online connections that are given them, and they all made different choices. They all chose different examples to illustrate and to deepen their understanding of what hate crime is.
Mm.
And I'm sure they'll go away now um, more enthusiastic, because I haven't taken them down an alleyway. In fact, I've taken them to a field and said, right, off you go. Like, run wild, and enjoy yourselves a little bit and see what you come up with.
Mm.
So I think that's an example of how you can blend the two things together. Excuse me, and it doesn't need to be online versus face to face.
Mm.
I think the two need to be blended together, in my opinion.
Okay. So I think, especially when it comes to your context, I could totally see why that blended approach would really, work. It would work quite well in terms of like how it can add value to what you do already. Um, when you're talking about the blended approach, what would you see as like the most important factors, or what, or maybe like a different way to ask it would be, what would be a good approach in terms of pedagogy to ensure good quality blended learning?
I mean, I think there are some things. First of all, you need to know your subject, and you need to know what it is that you can't leave to chance.
Mm.
So, for example, if you rely on online learning too much, you will leave some really important things to chance if you're not careful. So you must make the decision about what it is you must personally ensure that they understand and take away.
Hmm.
And when you've done that and you're happy with that, then I think you can broaden out, and then you can become more creative. So going back to that little example, um, they had a number of they had some handouts and some prompts, And then they had me talking, and I invited some questions, and I did some cold calling, did the traditional things to ensure that I left the crucial thing, didn't leave it to chance, that I was happy that they had understood it. And then from there, you go and enhance that understanding and add to it. I think it's really dangerous, and we're all guilty of this sometimes because of the amount of time pressure we're under, to try and cut a corner, perhaps, and say, right, I'm not going to do that. I want you to go and find out about that online. Here's the resource. Go away. Just look at that resource, knowing full well that that is a really important piece of knowledge that they must understand, because you won't actually save any time, because what you will discover in 3 or 4 weeks time or whatever is that they don't understand it. They haven't grasped what the key parts are, and you've got to do it again. So you've got to be really careful about making sure that you give them the really essential knowledge first and foremost. Now, in a sense, that sounds a little bit like direct instruction. But for me, as far as I'm concerned, I will use every trick in the book to make sure those students understand. So if I mix direct instruction with online learning, I haven't got a problem with that, because I'm using whatever skills and resources I've got to make sure that that I get the right outcomes for the students, and that is that they can demonstrate to me that they've understood, that they are on the path I need them to be on, to a larger extent. I don't. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think I totally agree with you in terms of like technology or online learning as like a tool, as part of like your toolkits that you have in order to, like you said, do what you can do to make sure that you can get the best outcome out of the students. And as experienced practitioners, we all have like a lot of different tools in our bag, so to speak. And when it's the right time to use a particular tool, then that's what you do, right? So no, I totally. I think the blended approach definitely offers so much in terms of enhancing what we can offer the students. So with that in mind, what would you say for you and your own teaching would be the best tools in terms of digital tools that you can use in your day-to-day teaching?
Well, I mean, what I'm trying to do at the moment is put together something that's really easy to use, something that's really reliable and robust in terms of, it won't fail on you. And at the moment, the thing I found, and I've experimented with Google and classrooms and things like that, but for me, I'm using Teams at the moment. And I'm using Teams, and I'm using home pages. So what I'm creating is a learning, not really a learning platform, but it's a learning launch pad, if you like, where my resources are in terms of what I'm going to talk to them, the lessons, the PowerPoints, if you like. But there are also a variety of other places where they can be directed to get pieces of information. And I'm trying to move to a situation where they naturally assume that the lesson is going to be blended. So in the ideal situation for me is they come into the room, they'll log on to Teams. Teams very, very rarely falls over. So that is very robust. They can access my PowerPoints, they can access YouTube, they can access any number of other parts of media that they can, and it's very robust. So using the Teams homepage allows the students to have if you like, a one-stop shop. So we've got an overall sixth form Teams homepage where there are links to all the different departments that teach within the sixth form, and within that there are all the resources that they need. And that means that in terms of outcomes, if they're out and about and sat in the car and mum and dad are doing something that they want to do and they got half an hour or three quarters of an hour to kill, they can pick up their phone and they can get into Teams and they can access the resources that you put there for them. They can take it with them. It's portable. It's accessible. It's not overly intrusive, so they can dip in and out when they feel like it. Nobody's tracking how many hours they spend on it. What we're looking at is the outcomes at the end, not like you haven't been on Teams for 2 days. What's the matter with you, right? Why aren't you doing that? I need you to do that. Although there are elements within Teams that will allow you to analyze which students have been on and how long they've been on for and what time of day they've been on for. And that can be interesting to a point. But it's certainly not something. The old idea is about freedom, and because Teams is so robust, so portable, so easy to use, that's my go-to place. What I don't like doing is trying to use a massive variety of different platforms at once. I think you need to settle on one. None of them are perfect. Settle on one and get them to do the things you want them to do. Don't expect them to do things that they can't do. Right. So understand the limitations of the thing you're working with, and to work with it that way. I was doing some staff training last night with a colleague of mine about using Teams, and I think there is some work to do in terms of digital literacy with staff and how they can make it accessible and actually make it appealing. I think we have well, I feel I've got an obligation to make my subjects as fascinating as possible and engaging as possible, and that goes further than just making your OneDrive available to students. It needs to be more engaging than that. So on the web, on the Teams homepage, they can, for example, I don't know, find a canteen rota. We'll find out when they're on duty in the canteen. They can check what the weather's like in Las Vegas if they really want to. Right? They can do some reflection. They can engage in TED lectures if they want. They can check the news, right? But they can also find all the information they need for the subjects that they're doing as well.
Yeah.
So for me, Teams is doing it, and it's doing as much as I want it to do because I know what the limitations are, and I know that it is not a panacea. It isn't. Oh, it's online. It's okay now. It's online. You can't treat it like a panacea. But you need to find something that you can work with, something that you understand, and something that, more than anything, is robust enough and won't fall over.
Yeah.
And the kids can rely on. Or if it's not reliable, they won't use it.
Yeah. Are there any other tools that you are interested in trying, or like, even if you say like actually Teams is the main one that I want to focus on because it does what I want it to do? Are there any particular functions that you would like it to have in the future that would enhance things further for you?
I mean, Teams is a platform, but you can get it. You can link in lots of other elements. You can do. So, for example, I use Whiteboard quite a lot as well. So, particularly with revision. So we may, from time to time, use Whiteboard. But the starting point is the Teams, and then you can use as many different apps as you think are going to work for you. So, for example, if you're a maths teacher and you've got a particularly useful piece of software, Teams is a place where you sit it, and that's if you like the launch pad. I think part of the battle is to get the students to go to that place in the first place, so that then you can get them to access the other tools that are available online as well. But you've got to break break down some of those, if you like, inhibitions or reluctance to go to online places to learn, because they've been taught that learning takes place in the classroom. And you have to chip away at that. So I use a whiteboard. I use forms quite a lot. You can use Kahoot. There's all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, it's got. But I think the simplicity and the repetition. I'm almost contradicting myself here, but the simplicity and the repetition and the reliability are also things that attract the students to it as well. If I want to know that, I can go there and it's going to be there. I don't have to spend 20 minutes looking for it. Right.
So how do you make it appealing then? Because you mentioned, I totally agree with you that this is probably one of the biggest challenges at the beginning of like trying to promote that kind of like blended or fully online learning environment to get them to want to use it, and to some extent staff as well, I suppose. What would you say from your experience is the one thing, or like the small number of things that you think need to be in place in order for it to be appealing enough for them to try out?
Well, I think it has to have that community feel. It has to be something that's special to them. And it has to be visually welcoming as well. But it's interesting you asked that question, because I was talking to our caretaker this morning, and he said to me that he thinks there's a hedgehog living in a compost heap, which is in our sixth form garden. Now, our sixth formers, as part of the enrichment, have been tending the garden and using the greenhouse, and we cleared lots of stuff away, and we created this little compost heap. He thinks there's a hedgehog in the compost heap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to discover if this is true, and then we're going to have a hedgehog watch. We're going to set up a camera so we can watch the hedgehog, and I'm going to stream it onto the Teams page so the guys can see our hedgehog, which they're already queuing up to name, incidentally. So I think you have to be creative. All right. These guys have been pestering me. Can we have a sixth form pet? Well, I'd love to have a sixth form pet, but these are the 14,000 reasons why it's not a good idea, including the insurance. So we're not going to have a sixth form pet, but we may have a hedgehog watch that will attract them to the page. But you're quite right. We've got a social section. But we have to be careful with images as well, right? And I think that you can make it visibly appealing, but some of them actually want functionality. If you sat down with a sixth form class and got them to analyse how useful a web page is, they can be really scathing about some web pages. This web page is rubbish because I have to do this, this, and this to get to where I want to do. They don't want to do that. They want to go boom, boom. Thank you very much. That's where I am. So it has to be simple, and they're attractive to that. Right? I've got a study session. I've got an hour. I don't want to spend 20 minutes trying to find the stuff. I want to spend 20 seconds finding the stuff, and then I need to get it done, because I've just had an enrichment session on how to manage my time. Mr. Penney's done, and I've got 5 minutes to make my mind up what I'm doing. So they don't want to spend forever finding that stuff, right? And I think you can. Once they know it works, they will use it, and I think more than anything, that's the attraction to it. It can have, we could have, sixth form joke of the week if you want. That will quickly lose its, Mr. head of sixth form was recommended album of the week, vinyl purchase of the week, but it will very quickly lose its attraction. I think we need to give them a little bit more credit and say they actually want to use it for what it's for. I'm sure the Hedgehog watch will be very popular. All right. But that's just come up today, and it was just an idea that I had. But I know that they won't sit there for hours watching a hedgehog. They will go off and find the bits and pieces of information that they need and use it because it's functional.
Yeah,
it works for them. Yeah, okay, it looks all right as well. It's not an ugly website. It's not an ugly page, but it works, and you can tell what the weather's like in Las Vegas on it, or Ibiza.
Yeah.
Or anywhere else they've been. So I think we have to be realistic that some of these guys are actually quite switched on. They do want to succeed, and it can't be. And I think this is a bit of a revelation as well for some people. It can't appear to be a social media site or a game site. Has to be, secured in the education, education area.
Yeah. No, I agree. Because I think it's easy to try to use, games or social media as, kind of similar to social media type of approach to try to get them interested. But then, if it's not serving the function that you want it to serve, then, then you're wasting your time in that sense because it's not adding value that you're wanting it to, from that perspective. But then the other thing that's often overlooked as well, which I think is really important, is just that simplicity that you mentioned.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when they think about technology or online learning, they're focusing so much on the kind of production value or, things that making it look really, really fancy when, when actually the most important thing there is it does what it's supposed to do rather than, it looking very impressive, because there are only so many videos that you can watch that you think is very impressive in terms of quality before you just think like that's just the norm, and before you kind of like, so what is the substance behind it? So yeah, I think that's really, really good to hear from you saying that as well. Okay, so in terms of AI, if I may, what do you think to AI in terms of the potential that it has, and also like where do you draw the line of what, where it stops being useful for us as educators?
Well, Phil, that's a really good question. I think we have to start with what would motivate us to use IA in the first place. If it's to speed up an admin process, I think that's fine. How do you speed up learning with AI? If we're in danger of filling in the gaps for the students, and they actually need to fill the gaps in, because for me that is their learning process. So I'm obviously skeptical. I'm thinking really carefully about whether or not AI would lead us into a cul-de-sac if we're not careful and become reliant on it. For me, if AI is going to be used to fill in and finish and speed up the learning process, I think we'll be really careful about what that actually means. Because when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, our students have got to remember things, and they need to remember things for themselves. And I think that if you use AI in a way that undermines that mental thought process that we all need to go through to learn and to be competent in certain areas, I think it's quite dangerous. I mean, there's I did a little bit of work with a colleague of mine about speeding up the choice process of students choosing different subjects. And what there are a series of well-written subject questions relating to the syllabuses and topics that we were teaching, and the idea was that we would try and use that to help students make an informed choice about what subjects they should take. And on the face of it, that seems quite a beneficial and kind of harmless process in itself.
Mm.
But the students don't like it because it creates a label. So if a student sits down and goes through I'm sure you've seen these kinds of questions that you know, we've all seen them. You know, it's recruitment firms use them all the time to try and filter out who's appropriate for what kind of position. So the principle, it was that principle applied to different kinds of A-level courses. So are you suitable to do A-level maths or biology or anything else?
Mm.
Students really don't like them because unfortunately what you find is that it creates a label and tells them what they can't do rather than tells them what they can do.
Mm.
And that's not really very helpful.
Mm.
All right. It may allow them to think carefully about what kind of things doing that subject might involve, some of the skills they might need. But that can be quite off-putting as well and quite daunting for a 15-year-old, 16-year-old to think about. So is that AI? I don't know. It was finishing a process that really I think the students should have had full ownership of in the first place. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe that is the thing about AI. Are you giving up ownership? Are you outsourcing outcomes? And I honestly, I'm sat here thinking now, Phil, why I would want to use AI in the subjects I teach. And I'm not convinced I can think of a reason at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, if I want them to write, if we want them to be able to write well-written answers in prose that are going to get them an A star, I don't think you can leave that to AI. I think there's an element of creativity in there that is very human, and a subtlety in there that is very human. That I don't think, I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong, that AI can reproduce. I don't think that it allows the students to fulfill what might be their potential. I don't know whether it's if it's something you use to sort information to allow you to get to the things you need quicker, maybe that's okay. But again, who's writing the algorithm? What is the input? Is AI value free? I don't know. I mean, I am coming from a sociological, historical point of view. I'm sure you know what I'm going to say next.
Yep.
I don't think that you can be value free. I think it's really difficult, and if you think you can, I think you're probably deluded. So, you know, at the front end of the AI, it will be ideas and people, and I don't think value freedom can exist.
Yeah.
in many ways. So how is it? So it's going to steer whatever you do in a kind of peculiar direction. I think if you're using AI to design things in engineering, I think that might be really useful. But how can you engineer learning? I'm I'm sounding quite skeptical now. I'm I'm willing to be convinced, but but I need some convincing.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally get what you're saying, and I think I totally agree in terms of like it's very hard to imagine that it can be value free, you know, because someone is writing the codes and someone is writing the algorithm, so clearly there's going to be some kind of bias, shall I say,
Mm,
in there, even if it's subtle or even if it's not meant to be, doing anything particularly, bad. But it's still clearly going to affect what the students get out of it, I suppose, at the end of the day. So, okay, well, when it comes to looking into the future, so obviously you mentioned about what you do already in your practice, and you also
mm,
mentioned about the fact that um, you have a role in sort of training or working with your colleagues to try
mm,
to kind of make this more of a organizational approach, if you like, or like
mm,
just to kind of roll it out uh,
mm,
sort of wider scale, if you like.
mm,
So if I was to ask you in 2 years' time or in 5 years' time, what would you like to see this kind of blended approach that you believe in?
mm.
Uh, what would it look like? What would you like it to to do in terms of enhancing learning? Realizing the potential that you think it has. In addition to what you already do, what would you like it to be like that may take some kind of advantage or advantages from other tools that you haven't mentioned so far? What is your ideal vision of what that looks like?
Well, I think you need to. Well, one of the things that I think you must do is to assess the digital literacy of the colleagues and the staff to find out where they are and what they are comfortable with.
Hmm.
Um, you can still find some really good teachers who are quite conservative in their approach, and in some ways they will continue to deliver some results that you can't take exception to.
Mm.
So I think that you have to take that into account as your starting point.
Hmm.
I think that, having said that, I think that that these platforms, social media, and the ways of thinking aren't going away, Phil. It seems to me that we are only going to become more integrated with them in the future. So
Mm.
so we will do our young people a disservice if we don't engage with them in a productive, positive way. So having said that, then I would still encourage all my colleagues and fellow practitioners to begin that process of considering what they can use.
Mm.
And having talked a lot about freedom today, I wouldn't want to impose a framework that demands that they must or they have to. And there are a lot of educational trusts out there who've got their own. This is the method. This is the lesson. You teach in this way, and sadly, that's not for me. I'm
Mm.
afraid. So I would be very reluctant to say, right, all your lessons have got to be blended. You've got to have this, you've got to have that. I want the kids to have access to this. If they're not, I want to know why.
Mm.
That's not where I'm at.
Mm.
So I would start with where they're at and what they're confident in, and then I would show them how these technologies can benefit them and benefit the students, and it would be a very softly approach,
Mm.
and to show them what bits will actually work, where the benefits are, and then invite them to choose the bits that they feel comfortable with, and to then to support them to develop those ideas. I think, you know, you can't go in with this idea that what I've talked about today is a panacea and it will suddenly transform everybody's learning experience.
Mm.
I think it's very positive. I think I get better outcomes, and I think the kids are more engaged. And I'm passionate. I think that that is correct. However, um, just going about, you know, value, being value free, you know, that is where I'm at. It's not where
Mm.
everybody else is at. And I was talking to more of my colleagues yesterday, who was head of science, and she was almost apologetic that she didn't know these things existed and she could use them. And I said, we don't. It's not about that. It's not about me being clever and you not being clever, or you not realizing what you can, or you're um, not functioning correctly as a practitioner. It's not about that at all.
Mm.
It's about adding to what you do, and making life better and easier for teachers, and to add something to the mix,
Mm.
rather than saying, right, it's a new mix, put everything you've learned before, you've got to go. I don't think that can ever be the case. In fact, she emailed me today and said, oh, you know, I haven't managed to do that, and please don't think I've ignored what we talked about. And I said, well, it has to be a habit. It has
Yeah.
to be something that, I mean, it's easy for me now because I do all my planning and prep on Teams in a way that I don't double up the workload. I don't think. Sometimes teachers will say, right, I've planned my lesson, and now you're asking me to plan my lesson again
Mm.
and put it into that format. You can't do that. You've got to help them to create a habit where they can incorporate these things in to what they already do, and then let it grow and let it build. Um, and that's what I said to her. It's habit forming, and then once you've got the habit, and that's how you use it, you don't double up. You don't double up the workload. So
Mm.
I think it would be really nice in 2 years' time, to answer your question properly, for uh, all of the people who work here in post-16 education, who offer courses, to be able to use the elements of what we've talked about today in a way that they feel comfortable with and they feel confident in, and for them to see the outcomes that they can get from students can be enhanced, and uh, they can enjoy the process. I mean, I like it.
Mm.
You know, I like it. It suits me, and it suits me as a teacher to do these things. Um, and I would hate to force anybody to do it, but I would really like it when I go onto the sixth form homepage to click on any of the links to the subjects and to see something that I recognise, that is something that I've talked about, or something I know can enhance the learning experience of the students in the sixth form, whether that's my pages, whether it's health and social care, whether it's maths, whether it's physics, whatever it might be, in their own way, and not in perhaps in a way that I've done it, but in their own way. Because I think, you know, teachers, the thing that attracted me to teaching right in the very beginning was the freedom and the creativity, the ability to have freedom and to be creative within the classroom, um, uh, in pursuit of that outcome, positive outcome for the students.
Okay.
Does
Yeah.
that answer your question, Phil, in a kind of
Yeah.
roundabout
Yeah.
way?
No, I think so. I'm certainly. I think that's a very realistic sort of vision that you can have. For what you could achieve as as a school or sixth form within a couple of years. And I do feel like what you've said is really important to have as foundation rather than just kind of rolling it out like if it was like the, the only thing that you should have. So now, because of how fast moving it is as an area in terms of technology and the role that it can play in education, one of my last questions for you is when it comes to research, what potential do you see in terms of research can help with what you're talking about, and or is there a particular aspect of the use of technology or online learning that you feel like would be good to have more research, so that people can be more informed in terms of what they do in their everyday practice?
Well, I think there's definitely some research to be done. I think there's quite a lot of research to be done. I think if I was to think about some research now, I would probably you've got to start with the consumers. So you've got to start with the students. You've got to find a way to assess their experience, to get them to reveal to you where they think the most informative or impactful interventions have been, whether that's in the classroom or whether that's with the model I've described as the blended experience or not, and to use that reflection from the audience to refine and think about how you may move forward, and then to be realistic with that data, and if something isn't working that you would really love to work, but actually you were not misguided, but you were actually mistaken, it actually doesn't work, then to refine it and try something else and move forward. I think we can't lose sight of why we're doing it, and we're doing it to secure good outcomes for students. And so if there are things we all think are good because we like the idea, we need to test with the audience whether or not it is actually doing what it needs to do. I mean, it was interesting when I was doing my MA in online education with the Open University. We were looking at a lot of data and research that have been done about the recording of lectures, and what impact not being in the lecture has on the outcome for students. And it kind of came into three kind of categories, really. That some students who went to all the lectures and actually and then watched the recording back. Yeah. Some students who went to the lectures and didn't watch the recording. Some students who didn't go to the lecture at all and just watched the recording. So they tried to track, see if there was a trend between what the outcomes were for those different ways of accessing the material. And not surprisingly, the students who attended the lesson and then watched the lecture back were getting the best results.
Mm.
They were probably the most studious students in any case. What interested me was whether the guys who could opt out and not go and watch the lecture, how their results were being affected or not. Because it occurred to me that you can see whether they watched it, but you can't see what they've done with it.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And I think that was really fascinating. So I would direct my research into the things I've provided with them. Actually, how useful are they? How often has that that intervention helped you to reach the outcome that we were talking about in the first place. And that might be something that takes a couple of years. It might be the length of a course, for example, the length of a 2-year A-level course. I think you would need to be consistent in things that you did so that you could test how often those interventions took place and what they did with those interventions. Thinking about a research model now, it would be very difficult, I think, therefore, to have a control to see what the impact would be or the outcome would be if those things weren't in place in the first place. Not sure how you get over that, because it would be unethical to have a control group where they weren't invited to it, and a group that was. So that's a non-starter. So it would be difficult to create a baseline, really, I think, Phil, for other than my experience and others' experience. I mean, I will have a feeling of whether I'm getting more out of these students than I would if I wasn't using these interventions. But getting a baseline might be quite difficult, in my opinion. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that some form of research shouldn't be carried out in this direction. And it could be based on the number of interactions that they have with the pieces of information that you give them, how they feel about it, whether they understood it. There are a number of ways and interesting questions you could ask them. You might want to do it in 2 or 3 additional subjects at the same time. It might be interesting to do one in science, one in certainly in a wordy subject like I have, for example, or maybe somebody in maths and physics, or even a practical subject as well, to see whether or not the same interventions are as impactful in those different contexts. And then, if we could do that research, then we would have a much better potential understanding of where we need to focus our next steps, if you like. And if it was me and I was designing it, I would certainly look in that direction. But it's in going back to that research that I was looking at with the Open University, that it gives with that, it gave them an out. They didn't go to all the lectures because they didn't have to go to all the lectures. Now, we'll make our own assumptions about that, don't we? And I don't know. The data definitely looked like if they relied simply on what was on the learning platform and didn't interact with people, that they weren't getting the same positive outcomes as the people who were. So I think we would want to prove, if I wanted to prove anything, it would be that the blended approach is the right way to go, and finding some data research or reflections from people who've been through that process to suggest that will be quite helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, thank you very much for all of your insights. Thank you for just sharing with us your experience. I think it's really interesting to kind of hear about the use of online learning in a real context rather than something that is theoretical, especially when it comes to more like the school or even sixth form sector. I don't think there is really that much out there from what I've seen, really discussing the potential it has for enriching learning at that level. So really do appreciate your time with this. Now, I'm going to ask you one last question to finish with.
Okay.
Can you ever see there being a day where teachers are no longer needed and everything can be done online, for the students to learn, maybe in the sixth form context, and why?
No, I can't envisage at a time. In fact, if we look historically, I mean, full-time and education's only been compulsory in this country since 1870, right? People learn lots of things before then, but they learn them from other people. The people bit, for me, you can't. I mean, as an historian or sociologist, you go back and say, okay, how did people become carpenters and wheelwrights and lawyers and you name it? Well, that's because they learn from other people. And I think that we are all have an inner teacher in us. And I don't think AI can, for example, replicate that. I think there are people in my life who've inspired me to be better and inspired me to learn things and inspired me not to give up when I was really struggling to do that. If you take that human thing out, don't know what it is. I mean, my mother taught me to swim. Could have taught myself to swim, I suppose. It was a much nicer experience letting my mother teach me to swim. My father taught me to ride a bike. I taught my son to play rugby.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's part of human evolution. It's part of how humans interact with each other. The ability to teach, or the passion to teach, I think is part of the human makeup, and you can see it in year 12s when their enrichment, when they are mentoring the year 7s that I've set up, and when they're supporting their reading, they instinctively understand what that exchange is about, and they instinctively want to do it. They want to teach. So I can't see a time. I certainly would not wish for a time where that interaction goes away. But then again, I guess that, talking about value freedom, I guess I was born this way. That's what I do. I was lucky enough to find this profession that suits me. I can't help myself in that respect. Other people are different. But when I was at university, or in any context, the time I always learned the most, in my opinion, was the time that I spent in conversation with other people, and picking up. It might be that there were lots of resources in and around, but it was that conversation with other people that actually join the dots up, if you like.
Well, on that note, thank you very much for your conversation. I definitely have learned a lot from what we've spoken about, so do appreciate your time. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much, Phil.